Excellent. I'm seeing so many incredible places: Canada, Scotland, Wye Valley in Wales. I'm probably pronouncing that terribly. New York City, Brussels, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, Berlin. Please keep popping into the chat where you're joining us from. That's very awesome to see. And I will start introducing and welcoming our speaker. But before we get there, I just want to obviously introduce myself. Welcome to our February WEAll Talk. My name is Tobile Chittenden. I am all the way from Johannesburg, South Africa, and I am the network co-lead at WEAll with a focus on membership. And for those of you that are joining for the first time, we are really, really excited to have you. The WEAll Talks are a monthly event, and they are a participatory event where we invite discussion and questions after our presentation by our speakers. So we'd love you to be commenting in the chat and also think of questions that you're wanting to ask our speaker towards the end of the presentation. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us. But a special thank you to our speaker, Matt Scott. We have been planning the session for months. We were just saying before you joined. Matt Scott is the Director of Storytelling and Engagement at the global nonprofit climate solutions resource called Project Drawdown. And he focuses on passing the mic to climate heroes that often go unheard. So in this talk, he's going to be sharing insights from his work, his learnings from his time as a global community lead and storyteller of the world's largest global hackathon with NASA, and also how he's interviewed hundreds of changemakers across the globe with his initiative called Let's Care. So we hope you enjoy this session. I come from a storytelling background myself, advertising and marketing, so I'm super passionate about this topic for this month. And I really hope that this, helps you consider the importance of stories in achieving the impact that you want to pursue. So with that introduction, I am going to hand over to Matt, who is going to speak for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tabile, and thank you, everybody. And wow, it's just exciting to see. I don't always do it, but I always love finding out where everyone's coming from and knowing that there are folks from South Africa and the UK and Switzerland and Portugal and Spain and the US, in Canada, and so on and so forth is just incredible. And it speaks to the beauty of this network and what WEAll does in terms of bringing together folks from a wide range of backgrounds in order to build the world that you all want to see, the well-being economy that you want to see. And so I am thankful to be here. Just to echo some of what Tobile shared at the beginning, if you have as you think of questions, or if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat along the way throughout the presentation. I won't pause over the next 30 minutes or so to stop and answer those most likely, but one thing we'll do when we do get to the Q&A portion toward the end of this hour, we will be able to draw on those and invite you to come off of mute and to share if you'd like, and I will get through as many questions as possible. But I'm so thankful for all of you and for the opportunity to just dive into my storytelling work. And I think the best place to start for me, other than just introducing myself, again, I'm Matt Scott. I'm the Director of Storytelling and Engagement at the global nonprofit climate solutions resource Project Drawdown. I'm so curious about your stories. And so I want to invite you all to answer this question in a word or in a few words. Who or what got you engaged in building a better world? And more specifically, who and what got you engaged in building this well-being economy? Maybe it's a person, maybe it was a moment, but I'm so curious to hear from you in the chat, and maybe there are multiple things that come to mind, so feel free to put in multiple things. But who or what got you engaged in the mission of WEAll and of this type of work, building a better world? Yeah, so I'm starting to see, see one response in the chat so far, and I always love to see like the waterfall of responses in the chat come through, and I'm going to read these. So I'm seeing a ton of different responses. Someone mentioned biophysical collapse. Greta, yes, a great inspiration for so many of us. Seeing a need for system transformation. There's a book that someone mentioned. Someone mentioned nature. Someone mentioned being inspired. Yeah, like I love what I'm seeing in the chat because people are coming to mind. Different forms of learning are coming to mind. So I keep scrolling through. Someone mentioned that they're working to build a better world. I'm thinking how design can help instead of being the expert in the room. So yes, like how do we tap into a wide range of perspectives? How do we tap into design thinking in communities to be the change we need rather than that solo source of insight and inspiration and wisdom? I love this so much, and I'll have to copy the chat so I could look at this more as I go along. But one reason I ask this question, and I want you all to keep your response in mind, or keep like the other responses that might come to mind after this. Maybe you responded that there was a certain teacher that inspired you to do this work, for example. Maybe there are other things that come to mind, but keep that in mind because for me, that's the core of why storytelling is important. It's recognizing that there are different reasons that we each show up in order to build the world that we want to see. Like I'm really honored to be in a group of people who are focused on this hopeful vision of building a better world. And something I realize is that the stories that have brought us to this work are so diverse. And so again, I'm seeing more of that in the chat, and I would invite you all to even just peek at the chat to take in the diversity of reasons that people show up and choose to make a difference. My work within the storytelling worlds and within Project Drawdown really focuses on using storytelling to get people to make an impact in the world and to do something. And so when it comes to using storytelling to engage folks, there's a lot that we're starting to do right. There's a lot that we haven't traditionally done right. And I'm here to kind of talk about how I think of these things before we get to questions at the end. So often the current paradigm of how we talk about getting people involved in making an impact or in tackling challenging issues is through a crisis lens. It's throwing the problem at people, thinking that that might motivate them to make change, or throwing statistics and data at people and hoping that that might motivate them to make change. Something else that I found in my career over the last decade as a storyteller is that sometimes we talk about technologies and practices and work to get people really excited about those as what will create change. But something that I found over my career and through the interviews I've done, through some of the research that I've tapped into, which I'll talk about, is that this new paradigm of centering stories of people, centering their experiences. This is Tanya Hicks, who's a phenomenal powerhouse, who I'll mention later on, and doing great work when it comes to climate solutions. It's these really diverse, nuanced stories of people that ultimately get through to people. So while the statistics, the data, the science, the reality of the problems and the crisis are important, it's also really important that we center real people who are working to make change, which is why I say that your story is your superpower. That's not only true with people like Tanya, who was on the last slide, but with all of you, your story and the ways that you as a human connect with other people or relate to other people are the thing that could get other people to take action and to make change. Over the last decade in my storytelling career, I've been really focused on identity and centering who people are rather than just what people do. And what's been so fascinating about that journey is that for a long time, so many of the stories that were put out there by a wide range of organizations, including a number of them that I've worked with that are mentioned in the in my bio and the like, so many of them are focused on the technology, on the statistics, on the data, on just the problem, but not on who people are fully. And one thing that that I've noticed in the last 3 years, really, with the pandemic, is that due to the pandemic, the lines between who we are as professionals, who we are personally, have often broken down because we've been in our homes working. We've had challenges and obstacles to navigate that, we've been forced to kind of bring our personal and professional and bring ourselves more into some of these spaces. I'll say in the US in particular, but also worldwide, one of the big effects almost 3 years ago, I think back to the protests that came out after the murder of George Floyd, which sparked so many other conversations on identity, on who people are, and was a place that, or was a moment that really encouraged a surge in conversation about who we are, about disparities, and between that and the pandemic, conversations about mental health, conversations about class, conversations about race and the like surfaced to a level that we hadn't seen in quite the same way, because that barrier previously existed. And so now, knowing that we're in a unique time, one where uncertainty for folks is arguably higher than ever between political dynamics, the climate crisis, and the like, we really need to tap into those voices to help people see that they do have a part in solutions, to see that they have a part in actually building this well-being economy, building this better world. I want to go back to my story. Some of you might have already picked this up, but the child there from this picture from the early 90s is me. And that's my dad reading me a story as I was growing up. And I share my backstory a little bit as just one example of why stories are important to engaging people in any kind of work. Though the work I do, of course, is focused on climate solutions currently. I actually grew up as a fan of this series, and if you recognize what this series is, like, feel free to shout it out in the chat. It wasn't on TV for a long time, but this is an animated cartoon. Yes, Trisha gets it in the chat. Jody, David, yes, this is Captain Planet and the Planeteers. And I was hooked on Captain Planet and the Planeteers growing up. Jody, yes, like, Captain Planet is also my hero. And this group is also so inspirational for me because I didn't realize it at the time as a kid fully, but I gravitated so much to them and to similar cartoons and stories because of the diversity of characters and powers that they brought to the table. So for those not familiar with Captain Planet and the Planeteers, like, you have Captain Planet who's at the center, and then you see all of the Planeteers around him from different continents with different powers and skills and strengths and weaknesses. And the thing I loved about this, and the thing I love about it now, talking about making an impact in stories, is that this helped me see, wow, okay, like, I can make an impact in some kind of way. Maybe it's not the same exact thing as, one of the other characters that's featured in Captain Planet, but I can make a positive impact in my own unique, diverse way. So Captain Planet helped me see the power of diverse perspectives to build solutions to the problem, which again is so critical to building this world that I know that we're all interested in building. I think I still somehow found myself, despite Captain Planet and the Planeteers, going into these impact spaces, and often you'll see me here with my phone at one of our NASA Space Apps Challenge convenings a number of years back. But, as I'd go into spaces to highlight stories of people making impacts, whether with NASA, with the Australian government, or with the White House, with IKEA, Nike, like a wide range of organizations like that, I found that oftentimes, I would be the only one of me represented in the room, or the only one of my identities, the only person of color, sometimes the only young person. And something I realized is that led me to not feel engaged in the climate crisis like you might have thought I would in growing up with Captain Planet. So I had this spark of wanting to make a difference, but the thing that kind of got in the way is that I just didn't see myself or people like me represented in the stories that I saw and in the media that was out there about who we look to as leaders to make the difference in the world. ultimately, I went to this massive convening, and if you look somewhere, if you look really close in there somewhere, you'll find me with about 2,000 plus other people in Los Angeles, California, with the Climate Reality Project, where I was trained on climate communication. And really, the thing that helped me finally actually see my power, my role, was this panel on climate justice, this panel that was talking about how we could support, work with, and center the voices of communities of color, low income communities, and just, again, diverse groups that are not normally centered in the dialogue. In particular, it was seeing and hearing the story of Naleli Kobo, who is pictured here now in her early 20s, that helped me see, wow, there's someone who's younger than me, someone who, like me, has asthma, someone who comes from a similar background who's doing this impactful work. I can do it too. And that's kind of why I say your story is your superpower, because the big thing that I've been able to recognize is that when you talk with people about who they are, about where they come from, about where, you know, all of the steps on their journey, there are these different pieces about who they are that tend to resonate, whether it's their identities, whether it's race, gender, it's the fact that they're a parent, the fact that they've experienced you know, adversity or barriers, but also opportunities in various ways. These things all connect with people in a variety of ways and help them understand these issues that we want them to care about. And so often I ask this question of what comes to mind when you think of climate change. And one thing I think is so fascinating is that when 14,000 people were asked that question of what comes to mind when you think of climate change, 44% of people in this one study hosted in partnership with IKEA, 44% of people responded with outcomes, 18% of people responded with causes, but only 3% responded with solutions. Which to me really means that we need to tell the story of people working on solutions. So for me, what got me into my space was the story of Naleli Kobo working on climate solutions. And at Project Drawdown, what I focus on is helping people see just that solutions are around them and that they also have a role in being part of the solutions. Again, I apply this work in a climate context, but it definitely applies beyond to impact work. So for those who don't know, Project Drawdown has this funny name, or this funny word drawdown in the name. Drawdown refers to the future point in time when greenhouse gases stop climbing and start to steadily decline. And you could see on this graph that little blue dot is the moment of drawdown. That's what we are aiming for with the implementation of climate solutions. When I talk about climate solutions, I'm referring to things that are real, that are in hand today. They're scientifically backed, they're backed by data, proven to reduce greenhouse gases, financially viable, currently available, and actually in the world today. But the thing is, before I joined Project Drawdown about 2.5 years ago, the way that we spoke about our climate solutions was only in this sense. It was talking about the sources of emissions. So you could see the current sources listed out of emissions in the atmosphere. And you'll also see sinks, which are the things that remove those emissions from the atmosphere. So 24% of the sinks that remove emissions are land sinks, 17% are coastal and ocean sinks, and there's another 59% that are, you know, emissions that are still in the atmosphere that we have to address through climate solutions. And so while this is one way that we've often talked about this work, which ties in with this diagram of climate solutions, which I won't break down fully in the context of this talk, but essentially, like, we've thrown statistics, we've thrown data, we've thrown bubble diagrams at people and charts at people, and the reality is that that doesn't resonate with everybody. So I could explain to you, of course, that in the context of the climate solutions that we work on, that electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, transportation, buildings, land sinks, coastal and ocean sinks, engineered sinks, and society are some of the areas of climate solutions. But something that Project Drawdown experienced, despite being a New York Times best-selling book, was that these stories and this information resonated with some groups, but also left so many people who hadn't previously seen themselves connected to the issues just distance from them. And so prior to storytelling, we had the Drawdown book. There's also this Drawdown review, which was a 2020 update on the Drawdown book, which came out in 2017. And there's the Drawdown Solutions Library, which is available on the website drawdown.org if you want to actually check out and click through the nearly 100 climate solutions. And I'll also mention just really quickly in passing, and if you do go back and watch the recording of this, I would just encourage you to like pause along the way through each of these different resources. But there are so many resources that we as Project Drawdown have put out that talk about climate from the research and data perspective, in particular, like the Climate Solutions 101 series, which I love, which breaks down climate solutions into 6 units and features the voices of experts and academics in this space. There is the Climate Poverty Connections report, which is also really focused on, just like it says, showing the connections between climate and poverty from our Drawdown Lift team. There's the Climate Solutions at Work guide for corporations, which really breaks down how different functions within organizations have a role when it comes to climate. But all of this was really informational and not centering the stories of the people doing this work, which is where the series that I started within our Drawdown Stories work, Drawdown's Neighborhood, comes in. Really what Drawdown's Neighborhood is it's about having people like all of you think about climate solutions not in the general metaphorical distant context, but realizing that they're all around you where you live. Like where I live in Washington, D.C., for example, even earlier today, I experienced one of the climate solutions that we have, maybe multiple climate solutions actually, now that I think about it, because I live in an apartment building that has solar on the roof, but also I was taking public transportation, which is a climate solution that I take part in, not only because it's good for the climate, because it's the best option and the most convenient, and yet we don't often even think of it as being part of the solutions. The reality is, though, that we have a hard time seeing that solutions exist, seeing that they're around us, or even noting them when we engage with them. Just like I said about the solar panels, which constantly help power my building, or, about the public transportation system. And so where I think stories are critical is it helps us actually make that connection, not only for ourselves, but for others, of why the issues that we're advocating for to make an impact matter. Something I want to share from a psychologist and economist, Preston Stokeness, is this work on the 5 Ds when it comes to climate communications, and I'll get to 5 S's for more brain-friendly climate communications. But I love this graphic, which kind of sums up so much of what the problem is with how we currently communicate when it comes to climate and climate news. So currently, when people are confronted with climate news, climate information, just the statistics, the data, the problem, number one is that there is at times a sense of distance, whether it's a sense of distance in time, like, oh, this is not a problem I need to address now. I have time. This could wait, or distance realizing that, oh, well, I still have power. I still have clean, drinkable water. I still have the conveniences of life that I rely on. So I don't have to think about this right now. There's a sense of doom that often comes up. And a lot of this is tied to just the way that our news cycles often center just the problem stories, but neglect the solution stories at times. So they'll talk about the challenges or the crises that we face, the various crises beyond climate even, but at times not talk about the ways, the less intriguing stories, some might say, of how people are actually building a better world, which isn't as sensational. There's a sense of cognitive dissonance that comes up when people are confronted with a different, just a different way of life that's different than what they're currently doing. There's a sense of denial that comes up for folks, and I know that many of us are familiar with the idea of climate denial. And then the 5th D, which isn't actually a D word, is this idea of identity, which is really pervasive and challenging to navigate, and a reality that sometimes because of politics, or I should say oftentimes because of politics, political identities, or just the groups we associate ourselves with, we don't necessarily take action, or certain groups don't necessarily take action when it comes to climate and climate news and climate information. The other thing I say about identity for folks, and again, this goes back to representation being so important and diversity being so important in stories, is that similar to my story growing up with Captain Planet, while I saw a lot of diversity in the animated sense that helped me, help seed a passion in me to make a difference, I also didn't see myself represented in the problem solving circle. So for a long time, I didn't get involved in climate change and in climate solutions until I saw, like, oh, this is something that people like me or people who care about the things that I care about actually do. And so those are some of the barriers. But one of the things that I love to share with folks, because I've realized how spot on it is when it comes to storytelling, is these 5 brain-friendly S's for climate communication. And so I'll talk through a little bit more my definition of storytelling, kind of a little bit of what I've learned through connecting with people. But this really sums up a lot of what I've been able to take away and leverage in my storytelling approach, which I would encourage you to think about as you share stories of the impactful work that you do. So number one is that per the psychologist and economist who does this research, says that stories are really critical to communicating in ways that are more effective. First and foremost, because storytelling, according to or Stokes, gives meaning, a sense of cohesion, it motivates for the long term, and it's something that that is human. Stories are all around us. They come in a variety of formats, and there's something that gets through to people more than just, again, statistics, data, and piling on that information alone. I want to stress how important it is to bring in statistics and data and science, but also how we need to marry that with story. It's important to tell stories that are simple, so not just of the overall system and the massive problem, which could overwhelm people or be beyond their grasps or have them, not seeing their role as part of the solution, but really stories that are focused on something that is tangible and relatable. And speaking of relatable, it's important to tell stories that are social, that feature characters that we resonate with. So that might be people that we actually know personally. That might be people who, again, whose identities we relate with or whose experiences we relate with. So in the storytelling work I do, I really focus on breaking down who is the human who is doing this work and highlighting as much as possible about who they are so that people do find those connections. It's also really critical that we share stories that signal progress. So letting people know, like, this is not only a feel-good story, but there's science, there's data behind it. We know that not only is this person someone who you want to be like and who we love and are inspired by, but that there are actual tangible ways that they're making a difference in emissions. And the supportive aspect in stories is really also about helping people see, I think maybe most importantly, that it's not just about telling stories of, in the case of climate, it's not just about telling stories of emissions or that very clinical thing that we're focused on improving, but it's also about how that impact work has co-benefits. So it improves people's lives in terms of improving health, in terms of improving equity. Really what talking about supportive aspects of stories is about is that it's about centering the things that people care about most, beyond the things that we want them to care about. So if someone cares about family, if someone cares about mental health, if someone cares about equity and equality, how could we help them see that those are also aspects of where we want them to go? It's just not talked about or framed in that context as often. And so when it comes to my definition of storytelling, I will say that, in short, for me, storytelling is about painting a more full mosaic of the story. It's very simple, but what I mean by that is that for me, storytelling is about bringing in the wide variety of perspectives that help someone understand a reality. The way that I talk about and look at story is that there is a story there, or reality there, that's embedded in each issue. So how could we make sure to engage a variety of folks in giving their perspectives, or informing us with their perspectives on that story? Some folks will talk about a wide variety of story structures, like the story narrative arc, and I personally don't think that there's one structure in particular. So you'll encounter the story narrative arc if you're looking at stories. You might encounter the idea of threes in stories, or the rule of threes. There's also this great idea I love that's a little less popular, but that I've been familiar with, of starting with the lion in the room, which is starting with like the most dramatic thing in a story. There's a lot also about stories in terms of being really brief, but what I really think is the core of stories, and the thing I'd love for you to take away from this, other than that your story is your power, is that effective stories really put people at the center. And in particular, the effective stories, as I've shared with folks for years, engage folks in a variety of ways. And really, we could ask ourselves the question of how we're doing these 6 E's of engagement. Are we easing a process for our audience in some kind of way with the stories that we're sharing, or with the information we're sharing? Are we elevating their perspectives? Are we empowering them to take action? Are we entertaining our audience? Are we educating our audience with something they want to know? Are we enticing them to take some kind of action, or making some kind of impact? It's so quick and simple, but I would encourage you all after to spend some time with really thinking about just thinking about ways that you're building in these 6 E's into your work. Really going from this place of the messenger with the microphone, to being someone who is putting people at the center, putting the audience first, and really thinking what is most relevant to them. And so storytelling, also one question I've often gotten from folks, like I don't see a particular format or medium for that storytelling. I typically have used video for storytelling, but stories could be communicated or centered through a wide range of media, including events and talks and workshops, podcasts, user-generated content, or community-generated stories. That's like when someone pulls out their phone and might record a perspective in response to a prompt, or submitting a voicemail, for example. Social media is one place where stories live. Op-eds. The list goes on in terms of just the wide range of ways that we could tell stories. And I'm also happy, as we get to the questions, to talk through just ways that you're thinking of your story and leveraging your story for great impact. Because I think the media really depends on what the specific goal is that you might have. And so here are a number of the folks that I've been really thankful to interview along the journey in the work that I've done through Let's Care and through Project Drawdown to date. And again, it's really focused on highlighting perspectives and talking about climate in ways that often aren't featured. This is the work that I do through Drawdown Stories, the program I lead. And I know I mentioned this a bit earlier, but Drawdown's Neighborhood is the name of the program that I focus on to, again, pass the mic to those who often go unheard and feature a wider range of perspectives. And so just to give you a little idea of this storytelling approach, I want to show you a trailer that just showcases who a number of the folks are who we feature in Drawdown's Neighborhood, that you could, of course, check out the full episodes and stories interviewing folks at drawdown.org/neighborhood.
Todo es playo. My Hi, I'm Yesenia Robles Pelayo.
My name's Whitney Terrell.
My name is Jose Villar.
I'm Emily Water.
Chris Phillips.
Jan Hagerman.
Robert Blake.
I'm Josna Harris.
My name is Alborian Jai.
And I'm helping the world reach drawdown.
I'm helping the world reach drawdown.
I'm helping the world reach drawdown. I'm helping the world reach drawdown by decolonizing the electric grid,
By addressing e-waste.
By working with interfaith communities. By reducing emissions.
By keeping 4 million pounds of stuff out of the landfill.
And by building capacity in the climate justice movement through the power of our stories.
So the thing I love about just the storytelling work that I do is it's really, and this is the point that I want to get across most, it's taking the one way that we've really effectively communicated the story of Project Drawdown in terms of these climate solutions. And again, you could see the sector of electricity as one example. Within this sector of electricity of climate solutions, you'll see specific solutions like LED lighting or distributed solar photovoltaics or onshore wind turbines, right? But the way that we've started to talk about climate, instead of just those very technical, science-based ways of presenting the information is in terms of people like Richard Tumashime, who is a solar installer at Energy Independent Solutions in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Richard, who comes from Rwanda, and in his story through Drawdown's Neighborhood, talks about what it was like navigating genocide, talks about what it was like just overcoming his challenges, to now continuing to go back to the communities where he came from to share solar as a resource. And this is just one photo of that. In Atlanta, Georgia, where we told some other stories more recently, we could talk about food agriculture and land use, or about stories of people like Adam Hicks, who works with the food waste organization Concrete Jungle, and who used his background teaching all over the world, teaching in Korea, to actually inform how he engages with communities in terms of making a difference, and in terms of actually helping them see their power and make a difference in the world. And so I could go on and on about just some other examples of what we do, but the reason that we use storytelling at a core is not because it's not for the sake of stories themselves. It's not just because stories are inspiring and interesting and compelling, but it's because stories play a role in forwarding these things that you'll see listed out on the slide, which are known as which we at Project Drawdown know as the accelerators for climate solutions. And this is something that's been adopted more widely within the climate solutions world. In particular, though, when it comes to storytelling, the three that I find are most relevant are that storytelling and engagement around it helps shape culture, builds power, and change behavior. So you'll see Tanya Hicks again as an example here. And again, we could talk about solar in a clinical sense. We could talk about gigatons of carbon, which is hard for anyone to wrap their head around or picture. Or we could talk about the story of someone like Tanya. We could talk about tree plantations on degraded land, and even talk about trees more broadly, like I was doing in a talk just a couple days ago with a group of teachers, a group of educators. Or we could talk about Clara Katango, who uses music to get through to people, who was afraid of trees for a long time growing up, afraid of forests, and now actually works to plant them. So you're thinking to yourself, how does someone go from being afraid of being outside, afraid of forests and trees, to actually being part of that solution? And that's kind of those are the dots that our stories and storytelling in general manages to connect for people as they watch those stories wherever they are. Stories really also have the power to help change behavior, not only by providing examples like we do in the episodes for Drawdown's Neighborhood, but also on each of the episode pages in our example, we really answer the question that comes up for folks of like, what can I do? Why should I care? One thing we do is present discussion questions for people to consider their relation to the story and how it resonates with them after watching it, after consuming it, after thinking about it a little. But then we also provide them with action and learn more resources so that they can take the story further. It goes from watching someone else's story to placing yourself in it, which is really easy to do when these stories feature themes that are truly human, and not beyond the comprehension of anyone who's tuning in, who's the viewer, which is really the point. Finally, the last thing stories aim to do in the context of climate is build power in a more diverse range of communities to be part of solutions, which is why I think stories and a diverse range of stories is critical. Because back to my story and back to a number of the stories that I've found in interviewing folks for Drawdown's neighborhood and for our work, is that so often we haven't seen ourselves or don't see ourselves represented in the spaces that make a difference, whether that's because we look at a group or a convening like COP, for example, each November, or we look at our government leaders and don't see ourselves represented there, that we think we can't be part of the solutions. And one way that I've really focused on sharing stories, this is just one example of a talk I gave for a room of about 200 folks at a summit last year. And we at Drawdown Stories within Project Drawdown partner with a wide range of organizations, and have worked with a wide range of organizations, including National Geographic, Pinterest, LinkedIn. We've worked with a wide range of academic institutions and connected with them, giving talks just like this virtually. Groups like Cornell and Stanford, but also community colleges and elementary schools, to help them see that they have a role in this, that this is a conversation that they should be part of, and that ultimately we're inviting them, just like I'm inviting you, to explore your story, explore how storytelling can be valuable for you and your community. And so, as I get to questions in a second, I just want to invite you all to really go back to your answer to the question at the very beginning of why you decide to do this work. I think one of the things that we do as humans oftentimes is that when we're thinking about why we decide to do this work, why we decide to make an impact, we don't connect that with why others decide to do the work that they do and make the impact they do. And so I would encourage you to really tap into your own story, sharing why you care, sharing who you are, sharing just the aspects of you that make you the person that is building the impact that you're making. Because those things, as we found through Project Drawdown solutions storytelling, as I found through my work with NASA, where we focused on centering stories, where I found through my work with Let's Care, where I focused on that, is that people relate to that, people gravitate to that, and ultimately, as I said earlier, stories are your superpower. And so as we get to questions, and I want to invite Tobile to also come back up, I just want to share just some info for folks who do want to get in touch after the fact, knowing that we don't have a ton of time following this up. So feel free to check out Drawdown Stories at drawdown.org/stories, to connect on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/MattScottGW, and then also emailing at matt.scott@drawdown.org. And I'll leave that up for a few seconds before we have the first question.
Thank you. That was incredible. I loved it. Really, really incredible. I'm gonna change the view so that we can see everybody.
Great.
There we go. Welcome back, everybody. So we have 15 minutes to get into the Q&A, but I really think I just want to give you some clapping hands there. I don't know if anybody else wants to join and just expressing some gratitude to Matt. That was so, so well done.
Thank you.
The slides, the presentation, the imagery, the questions and pause for thought. It's so, so well done. So really appreciate and all the effort that you put in, and also for giving your time to us today. So we would love to, as I mentioned before, hear your voices, hear your questions, comments. Please put up your hand. So if you go to reactions, you can just use the raise hand button. It's at the bottom of the screen. But we have had some questions in the chat as well. So I think Don was one of the first ones. Don, I don't know if you want to unmute and just share your question that you had put in earlier, Don Christoph. Are you still there?
I'm still here. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Hey, two questions, Matt. One, your slide deck. Could you make that available? That's
Yeah,
easy.
I can make sure to so there will be a recording of this after the
Right.
fact, but I could also just coordinate with Tobile to share, just send the slides over along and follow up. So one way or the other, I'll make sure that you have all this info.
Awesome. Okay, the harder question. Okay,
Uh-huh.
on your 5Ds, right?
Uh-huh.
Do you think that is true everywhere or only in developed countries where they have the luxury to think that way?
So it's interesting to go back to the 5Ds that you're referencing of distance, doom, cognitive dissonance, denial, and identity. And I think that's a great question. I don't think that there's necessarily a class divide in terms of like those things getting in the way. So for instance, if I really break that down, I mean, I'm thinking through this out loud because it's a great question. So like the sense of doom, for example, that is a thing that regardless of sort of where we come from, being hit over the head with the problem alone without the solution, or being hit over the head with the crisis and the ways we currently communicate doesn't empower action. Throwing the problem at people, regardless of the problem or where we are, does not empower action itself. It creates a frenzy. And I continue to go through the sense of distance is one that I think it most applies in terms of what you're saying, because there is less of a sense of distance if, for instance, you live like in the context of the United States, just to give that as an example, even though there's so many other places, like if you live in a Jackson, Mississippi, where there's not, or there hasn't been access to drinkable water as recently, or Flint, Michigan, these problems hit closer to home than they do for, even where I live in Washington, D.C. So there are always going to be differences in people's experiences, but I think that the reality, for instance, with that of like the sense of distance being something that gets in the way for people. I mean, if you're closer, then that's maybe not the biggest issue for you. And so maybe what I'm getting at is like the 5Ds apply, and they look a little bit different in different contexts, but I do think that they still apply in a variety of contexts, because ultimately when we're looking to get people to take action, the thought is, how do we motivate them to take action? Is it through the way that we're currently communicating, or is it through something that actually helps them see their ability to take action? And I think that is something that's a little bit less constrained by whether it's, from a quote unquote developed country, which I know is language that some people do and don't use, or from a country that is, still working on these things. So that's a powerful question. But I think it's good to really rethink, just zooming out from the specifics of that. It's good to really rethink, how do we communicate with people to get them to make a difference? Is it just throwing information at them and assuming that they'll do it? Or is it really thinking, what is it that will motivate them to care and to take action to prioritize this? But yeah, that's a whole other webinar that we could do too, Don.
Right. My point is that
Yeah.
if we both live in the United States, so we could probably walk out the door and throw a stone and hit somebody that is climate denier, right? Because we have the luxury to do that. Okay. Yeah. But if we go to Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that's going to deny there's a climate problem. Okay. Because they're in the middle of it. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, I'll just push back too, because that's actually one misconception. Climate denial makes up less than 10% of the population of folks. And so I think that, I just kind of want to clarify that for folks.
No, I just picked that one D out of the list. Okay. We also can, we can, there's other Ds that we can have because we have the luxury to think about it. But if I'm dealing with climate issues on a real basis, while I'm in Africa or Indonesia or someplace where it's in my face, it's a real thing every day, right? I don't have the luxury of thinking that way, because now I'm in adaptation survival mode.
Well, I mean, I think that the problem, and yeah, this is I want to make sure to move to other questions, but the key is that, like, the sense of all these things kind of function in the system. So it's not just the one, pulling out the 1D not applying, for example, is something that I think is something that we could talk about. But really, when we think about all of them, there's still the reality of the sense of doom not being empowering for folks. And yes, like being based in the US is a reality, but with the work that I do, it's also focused globally on working with communities. With the NASA work that I did, for example, that was for about 5 years, working with people in 85 plus countries in a wide variety of contexts, dealing with a wide variety of circumstances on getting their communities to take action and make an impact. And so it does look different in different places, but I think what's important at the core is recognizing that the ways that we have communicated and the ways that we do communicate, again, while we need to put the different communities we work with at the center, they're not effective in terms of driving the action we want to see.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Don, for that question. Yeah, as a person from Africa, I can resonate with those Ds as much as we are in the midst of climate change, and maybe denial is not a good one, but I definitely think, for example, the identity, there's a lot that resonate in terms of mobilizing people to be part of these things. There's so many other things that we're dealing with in these types of countries, in South Africa, for example, that are barriers towards us joining these types of conversations and feeling that we don't belong, and language being very academic and full of jargon. And so, yeah, resonate a lot coming from South Africa myself. I wanted to hand over to Amanda, and then Simon, will come to you. Amanda had a question. Amanda, if you want to unmute yourself and share, that would be awesome.
Thanks, and thanks, Matt. And my question was around how do we connect with people whose stories are usually silenced or seldom heard?
Yeah, and I love that question, and thanks for asking that, Amanda. Because well, one place that I would say to start is to really look at the rooms that you're in and the conversations you're in, and consider, maybe this is worth conversations within some of those rooms, but who's represented in those rooms and who's not represented in those rooms and in those spaces. And so, for example, in the climate community, we know that those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate, not only in the US context, actually, but in the US context and otherwise, but I so often talk about this with US audiences, like Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color in the US context, low-income communities in the US context, but also beyond the US, people of the global South, as it's often referred to, or a wide variety of communities that are often not represented, or often not represented at the tables, like COP, for example, and other problem-solving tables. That's, for me, who I kind of focus on bringing into the room. And how do I actually go about connecting with and finding those groups? What it really comes down to is giving the example of the work that I do with Drawdown's Neighborhood, or another storytelling initiative that we're working on that is just more global in nature. Looking at any place, there are people who are the helpers, who are the problem solvers, who are already connected with these communities. And so we forming relationships with the people who know the issues locally the most. Maybe they don't know those specific people whose voices often go unheard, but they could point us to climate communities and climate organizations. And through those climate communities and climate organizations is where I've often been able to find or get connections to some of those folks whose stories haven't been represented or shared. And so most of the folks that we featured in Drawdown, or many of the folks that we featured in Drawdown's Neighborhood, have never been interviewed. Most of them haven't been interviewed or featured or prominently platformed often. And we do that kind of just through I'd almost call it like a monkey bars approach of going from like one connector to the other until we find people who are interested and willing to share their stories, but who just have not been given the opportunity to do that, which is surprising. Like far too often people aren't asked to share their perspective and their stories, which is why the work that I do with storytelling works, because people are so eager oftentimes to share their stories and perspectives.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda. Simon, you can go ahead.
I'm just wondering, Tobel, if we have time, because you probably want to wrap up. But I mean, great presentation, Matt. I did have a couple of questions, and I'd love to have a further conversation, maybe. But do we have time, Tobel?
Yes, choose one question, Simon.
One question. So I would. The thing is, I'm afraid that the answer is going to be a long one, and it is a challenging one. And so we struggle with this, Matt. I mean, great presentation. I'm really glad we're connecting with Project Drawdown, but we struggle with this sort of, particularly looking at power and the understanding that, you know, the radical economic systems changes needed to actually get to Project Drawdown. But how do we reach across different power and interests? You know, how we get the right balance between the radicality that's needed for transformational change, but it's not too radical that scares people off, and people then end up becoming more conservative, holding on to what they have because they're also afraid of that radicality, or the being something that's viable, but also maybe too fanciful. And it's about striking that balance, because when we talk about power, we need to reach out across different sectors and interests.
Right. Yeah. And it's, the answer, I almost ripped off my headphones out of excitement there, but it's like, it's not as long of an answer as you'd think. I think, you know, in the context of what we do at Project Drawdown, and I will drop in a link to the Drawdown website, because this is only a small window into the work that we do. And I'm actually going to also drop in the link to our programs page, because really the simple answer is segmenting your audiences and thinking about them more specifically. So within the work that I do with Drawdown Stories, while it's more tailored to a general audience, like I often focus more specifically on engaging with community organizations, with educators, or formal and informal educators. We also have programs, though, to your point about power, that are focused on corporate partners. So if you go to the programs page, you'll see Drawdown Labs, which works with organizations like Google and with Etsy and with Pinterest, and like a wide range of those types of organizations who have this massive power and influence to get them to shift toward Drawdown. So that's a different type of messaging than I use with the audiences I reach. There's also Drawdown Lift, which works primarily in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and focused on like climate poverty connections, as I mentioned very briefly early on in the presentation. And so knowing your audience is critical, and kind of being able to speak to them about what the value is to them, to answer their questions in a way that's relevant to them, to walk them through how they could make this transition in a way that's beneficial to them. That's really what this is all. That's what this is, what you know, makes the difference and resolves kind of I think the problem that you're addressing. And so please, like, definitely check out drawdown.org for more on some of the different ways we work with a wide range of audiences, because Project Drawdown works with a wide range of different types of stakeholders. And we do that by speaking to what each of those segments care about most. Thanks, Simon, for that question.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think that was perfect timing, because we are just at the hour. I don't know if you want to say one final word before I wrap up, Matt, or...
Well, I'll just say thanks would be one word. But, you know, if anything, I just want to thank you all for the time. And I appreciate that there are so many more questions too. And if there's ever just a bunch of questions that you would like for me to speak to, or also find other folks to speak to in relation to storytelling, happy to do it. An hour can't do this topic justice, but I'm glad that that you've kind of had the questions you've had, and I've appreciated all of you. And again, Tobiele, hopefully you could share just my contact information if folks do want to follow up in any way, and we could be in touch. But thanks again, everybody.
Yes, so I will definitely be in touch with everybody that registered for this talk, and I'll share the presentation as soon as we've got it. I also want to say that we've obviously recorded this session, so it will be on our YouTube channel. You can just look for WEAll on YouTube. I'm also sharing a link to our newsletter, so you can sign up to keep updated. If you are not even part of the WEAll community, please get stuck in, join our newsletters. And if you want to become a member of the community and you're working towards economic systems change yourself, please don't hesitate to email me, tobile@weall.org. I have loved this presentation. One of the takeaways for me, Matt, is I loved what you said about watching somebody else's story and then being able to place yourself in it and then being able to act, and those steps that you provide people. I think that's such a beautiful journey for anybody to get involved in. So thank you so much for this incredible presentation. Like I said, it was so beautiful. And to everybody that is still here, I would love to invite you to our next WEAll Talk. Please do sign up for the newsletter so that you can get the dates and the timing. It is going to be on the global living wage. So the living wage crisis that we've obviously had we've had a crisis of living costs in various countries around the world. So we think this living wage discussion and conversation is really, really important too. So we'll hopefully see you in March, end of March, for that talk. Please keep tuned to our newsletters and email me if you have any questions. Thank you to everybody for joining and hope to see you soon. Bye.